Today I'll be going over even more secrets from the Raft storyline that you may not have seen or even picked up on. If you haven't yet watched my previous video on chapter 1, then I'd highly recommend you watch that one first and then come back here so you know what's going on. This is chapter 2 of the Raft storyline. So now we know why the radio tower engineers fled and why the Vazakatan crew began fighting and eventually separated via lifeboats, and how Alberte caused Bruno to essentially go mentally insane. It's time to speak about the 2 islands which we're instructed to discover within chapter 2. First up, you're given a 4-digit code to the sandy caravan town, and upon floating there you'll realize these people were very disorderly but somehow civilized. They had an entire community set up with an actual mayor and also a hospital on site and everything else that you'd need to survive. The mayor's hat can actually be found within the mayor's office, and I'm sure you know, but Caravan Town is the first island to make use of zip lines, and they did so in the most chaotic fashion ever. They can be found pretty much everywhere, so a zipline tool is pretty much essential when exploring this location. Anywho, there are 3 different people who wrote notes on Caravan Town, most being from the child Detto. He wrote inside of his own so-called scientific journal. The other 2 people who wrote notes, which we end up discovering, are Mariam and the doctor Henrik Scholl. There is also a newspaper ripout which we find, and it actually tells us the reason for Caravan Town's existence. The homeowners within the popular city of Jakarta, which is obviously in Indonesia, were essentially forced to make places of residence using what they called drifting vessels, as the mainland was literally just disappearing due to the rising water levels. That's why Caravan Town can also be considered quite rundown and pretty rushed, since the people took what they could get and made whatever they could with it. Dry land is dry land at the end of the day, and it was better than just drowning in your own house. However, Caravan Town didn't just become the home to native Indonesian people. There were also those from other countries who simply had nowhere else to go, so they came to the sandy cliffs of Caravan Town to try find some kind of safe living. It's quite likely that multiple caravan towns are also in existence upon the Raft Ocean, since after all it's quite a cost-effective way of providing shelter for the masses. However, sadly, like most good things in Raft, something went wrong, and it led to Caravan Town being completely deserted. The people of Caravan Town kept an entire portion of the island empty purely for their pigs, which they bred and ate so they could survive. However, it wasn't long before these pigs contracted salmonella, and why you may be thinking, surely salmonella isn't an issue since it's quite common, right? When it comes to well-established wealthy communities, it's not really a worry. However, since Caravan Town was pretty run down and people were living under quite poor conditions, it hit them hard and was incredibly difficult to avoid. The medical supplies were severely limited as well, and the antibiotics provided by someone called Heng simply weren't enough, and since not everybody could be healed, the bacteria ran rampant as there was always someone with the illness. And after months of attempting to battle this disease, the flag was raised and the people of Caravan Town simply said goodbye to their homes for the last time. However, while Caravan Town was still running strong, a young boy called Detto wrote numerous notes in his so-called scientific journal, which indicated he was trying his utmost to come up with a solution to save the world. They were quite underwhelming attempts, of course, and included things like building a rocket to go to another planet, draining the ocean using a well, yes, a well, eating kelp to survive, and using diving suits and so on. However, although the ideas were never put into fruition since he was a child and wasn't really taken seriously, the effort he put in to try fix humanity's problem was pretty admirable. A lot of Detto's projects can be seen across Caravan Town, like the pipes which you have to rotate in order to get seawater into the well, and the pipes leading down to the ocean floor which allow someone to walk down there with direct access to air, and so on. Detto really tried his best. We're also given the task of launching the rocket that he built, but could never use himself. However, it sadly doesn't go well, and that's when we discover Major Tom to commemorate the experience. Although Detto's experiments often fell short, it's clear to us that in his mind, these were actual attempts to help the adults who were giving up. And finally, one of the last notes that we find is by Mariam, and is addressed to her son, called Samir, which, fun fact, is one of the developers' names, but Anywho, Mariam tells her son all about her work on the so-called reformation project, which was also briefly mentioned in the notes upon Vazigatan. It's a terraforming project and consists of digging out rivers in Africa and is overseen by heavily rich people. However, apparently this project had failed for whatever reason, leading most of the rich people to flee to the North or South Pole, leaving everyone else behind. Could this indicate that a location within Chapter 3 could be at the South Pole? Well, let me just get you thinking real quick. In real life, the South Pole has what's called auroras. They're basically the northern lights if you've ever seen those, and are absolutely mesmerizing. But I bet you're thinking, what do these have to do with Raft? Well, remember that teaser we received sometime back in August? The one with what we assumed were tanks or nuclear reactors of some sort? Well, what if the green thing in the sky is in fact an aurora, and it will be our job to either take down the rich people or to discover what they left behind in order to maybe help ourselves. It's just a thought, but to me it definitely kind of holds some weight, so let me know what you think in the comments down below. Anyways, since we now know the residents of Caravan Town fled towards Tangaroa, our next objective is to go there and explore to see what happened. Once it appears, you'll be amazed by the size of it. It's a floating city made up of purely skyscrapers and is covered inside of a massive floating ball with a huge tower in the middle. The sphere of glass is a sight to behold in itself, to be honest, but once you get inside, you have to start right at the bottom and work your way up. You need to complete numerous puzzles like moving containers with a crane to get through a certain room, collecting tape to repair fuse boxes, and much more. However, the first note immediately gives us an idea of what's gone on here. Remember when I said those who fled Caravan Town came here? Straight away, the first note outlines a huge fleet of rafts headed for Tangaroa, and it suggests they're coming to try join the city's population. However, the captain of Tangaroa wasn't having this and decided to try outsail them since their supplies were already running low, and more people on board would only mean it could get worse. The captain is obviously warned that speeding up the engines that much will probably overheat them, but he doesn't listen, and eventually they catch fire. And at this point, Tangaroa was just freely floating in the ocean, so it was time for the engineers to inspect what happened to the engines. And once they got down there, they discovered an entire cluster of dead beetles were in the cooling feed, which in turn prevented the engine from cooling properly. There was also a boy found with his dog in the engine room, and it's rumored that this little guy is Detto from Caravan Town, since he's inventive and could probably have snuck his way in. Workers upon Tangaroa tried their best to battle the beetles inside of the plantation, and with the electronics failing, food supplies running low, the engineers took in the boy who is rumored to be Detto. They then collected all the food that they could and will attempt to build a boat to travel towards a location they think is safe. While that's all happening though, the captain has requested numerous things to be done in order to keep everything under control and in his hands. This included rounding up all the pets of the residents of Tangaroa, and this is because the residents of Tangaroa are described as desperate at this point, which indicates the situation is really getting dire, and that the residents could possibly even consider eating their pets to survive. Furthermore, that fleet of rafts had caught up to Tangaroa now, since the engines weren't functioning, and were now boarding the bubble in order to join the population. Something had to be done, and the captain decided the best option was to shoot these people without killing them. But this didn't go down well with the residents of Tangaroa, as they already didn't like the captain. As a result of this incident, they immediately began rioting. But while all of this was going down, the engineers had finally got an engine for their escape boat. They managed to retrieve it from one of the golf carts used by security, and this was actually the young boy's idea, and he also removed it from the cart himself, making him a valuable asset to the engineers. There are many parts within the Tangaroa story which we clearly aren't told about. However, upon entering the cockpit of the bubble, we find a note which sums up what happened, and it's actually discovered that the engines of Tangaroa were barely tested before launch, meaning with or without the beetles, it was not going to work out. Furthermore, the crew had little to no experience. The captain also says one more thing in this note which is very interesting. It's almost like he's trying to subconsciously make himself the good person in this all. He described himself as the monster in the cockpit and said this was all an act to get the people of Tangaroa to leave and save themselves. And although it sounds like this has been said with good good intentions, the captain also ended it with, quote, "be it physically or spiritually," unquote, which tells us a lot about what the captain was willing to do. He also states that he will be the last to leave Tangaroa, and it's unknown whether he was or not. However, it's clear to see that the people who once lived there have long moved on to somewhere else. Could it possibly be Varuna Point? Subscribe to the channel so you can get news on Chapter 3 of Raft as soon as it comes out, as well as any leaks or hints given to us about future updates. If you enjoyed today's video, then a like would go a long way. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I'll see you next time.